6. Coming in at number 5 is another mystery novel and another mystery series that I started this year, and it is Farewell My Lovely by Raymond Chandler. This is the second Philip Marlowe novel. I absolutely loved the first one as well. The first one is The Big Sleep. It totally drew me in. Raymond Chandler has a very deft way of being incredibly sexist and incredibly racist, and yet being pissed off with racism and an uber feminist all in the same breath. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to watch Philip Marlowe cycle between hating the world that he's in, trying to make it funny for himself as a way to get through, and at the same time trying to protect whatever values he thinks are deeply important. Now, I don't think that was necessarily what Raymond Chandler intended me to get from this novel, but it's definitely what I've taken from the series. I'm really, really interested in the function of Philip Marlowe being a deeply salacious and pervy person, and yet at the same time really advocating for the women's rights that around him. So I'm going to continue on with this series, but I think when I get to the end I might have to do a series overview where I talk about stuff like this more in depth, because duh. Coming in at number 4, we have a complete surprise to me this year, and that is Jellyfish by Janice Galloway. I'm not going to say very much about this novel here because I've already discussed it at length in a review that I did earlier on in the year, so I will link that down below. But this was possibly the best short story collection I have ever read. It is by a Scottish author who I didn't even know existed before I read this collection, and it was perfection. We're getting right down to it now. So coming in at number 3, we have The Time in Between by Nancy Tucker. The Time in Between is Nancy's memoir of her anorexia, which led unfortunately to bulimia, and her ongoing struggle with both of these things. When Nancy was 9 years old and her teacher asked the class to write an essay on what they wanted to be the most, she wrote, "I want to be thin." She had no idea why she wrote it, but the thought pervaded the next 10 years of her life. This is possibly the most surprising memoir that I've ever read. I found myself transfixed, not with horror, but with shock at how much she had gone through and how she had prevailed over so many things and with such low odds on her side. The memoir is also written in various different formats, so you have extracts from Nancy's diaries, you also have Nancy's current self narrating what is going on, you have pages like this where we have scripts. There's also pages where Nancy does very tongue-in-the-cheek quizzes for parents and for herself and for other anorexia sufferers, and I genuinely loved the way that she explained how sympathy impacts her and how people's need to be okay with it themselves sort of translates into a need to make the person okay with it. And it's a phenomenal memoir. If you read nothing else this year about body positivity and overcoming what is in your mind and your programming, your subtle programming, then read this. Also follow Nancy on Twitter because she is a really, really, really nice person. Now, at number 2 is a complete and utter shock for me, and it is The Cuckoos Calling by Robert Galbraith, obviously aka J.K. Rowling. I put off reading this novel for such a long time. I have read The Casual Vacancy by J.K. Rowling, and while I did really enjoy it and I loved some of the characters from it, it felt like it was missing something. And I don't mean the magic of Harry Potter. I don't expect it to be Harry Potter, and I don't expect her to continue to write things related to Harry Potter. I was totally behind a new foray into adult fiction, but there's a something missing in it that is completely present in this novel. I think that all of the things that I find magical about her writing really have essentially nothing to do with Harry in the end. Harry's story is amazing and the world that she created is amazing and I loved it. But what pulled me in wasn't the world and wasn't the fantasy setting, and that wasn't even why I was there as a child. What pulled me in was the writing. I love her red herrings, I love her misinformation, I love her characters who don't love other people, I love her characters who are loved by other people and don't love other people. I love her villains, I love that nobody is a linear type of person. I love that she is able to completely construct a backstory in a space of 10 pages that makes you utterly believe in and root for this person. The Cuckoos Calling follows Cormoran Strike, who is a detective in London. He's extremely down on his luck, which is a trope for this genre that I have to admit I quite enjoy. He ends up with a secretary who he can't pay for and didn't really want after getting rid of the last one from the temp agency. And then he lands a case about a supermodel who committed suicide in the previous year. His relationship with Robin, his secretary, is phenomenal. She is not a kick-ass female, which is what I love most about her. She's not one of these incredibly stereotypical, over-feminised women that I see so much in fiction now, who are beautiful and perfect and can wear high heels and can still do karate and wield a gun and safe crack and all of the other things that is a real headache to me, because I find that in attempting to represent women, people are oversimplifying the entire idea of feminism and femininity, especially in novels which feature strong female characters in a predominantly male environment, because I feel like the authors try to overcompensate for the fact that they are a female in a male environment, and instead of just let them be a person, they become a caricature, and that really pisses me off, and I'm now on my soapbox. I'm getting off right now. This is 550 pages and it's not particularly big font, and I flew through this book. Flew through it. I would recommend it to anybody who A, has enjoyed Harry Potter but didn't like The Casual Vacancy, B, loves anything like other detective fiction, like, for example, this one or this one. And I would recommend it for anybody who loved a thriller this year but is terrified by or doesn't like the traditional hard-boiled detective novel. And coming in at number 1, can you tell that I'm not musical? We have To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. There were many reasons why I shouldn't have loved this novel as much as I did. A, I am not the biggest fan of stream of consciousness. B, I read a Virginia Woolf novel in university. I read Orlando and I hated it. I hated it with the burning passion of 1,000 Suns. And C, it's about one day, and it's not one particularly interesting day, and it's not one particularly long day, and none of the characters in the end are entirely likeable, and yet I loved it. It helps, I think, that I listened to this novel as well as reading it. That there is a recording by Nicole Kidman, which I think is part of the Audible signature collection. I can't remember. Either way, you'll find it on Audible, and I'm not a big fan of Nicole Kidman either, and yet it was perfect. Her voice lends a kind of whimsy to this novel that I think you may otherwise find difficult to find, because it is quite depressing subject matter, but she lends a lightness to it that I don't think I would have found on my own and now can't stop thinking about. To the Lighthouse is an incredibly short novel, which is essentially a novel of 2 parts. In the first part, we are introduced to the Ramsay family. They have a holiday cottage in sort of coastal Scotland where they invite lodgers for the season. And some of these lodgers are friends, and some of these lodgers are people that they have just taken on, and the lodgers form a kind of circle around the family, which enables the family dynamics to really be picked apart. The other thing that I really like about those family dynamics is that they're kind of told backwards, because in most novels I find that we unpick the happy family to see the root cause of them being unhappy, but in this novel it is completely reversed. We start out on the very first page with one of the children saying that if he could, he would quite happily kill his father for upsetting his mother, and then we work our way further into the family and realise that they might be miserable, but they are deeply interconnected to each other, and they physically cannot be separated. They do not work as single parts, they only work as a whole. And then there's part 2, which happens many years later after the war, and that's the other thing that I didn't realise about To the Lighthouse, but it is actually post-war fiction, and we discover what has happened to the Ramsays and to various other young men and members of the lodger collective. And the second part of the novel tore me to bits. I had a tiny pause in between the two parts because I could feel myself folding in and trying to hold the pain at bay. It might not sound like I loved this novel as much as I did, but it was a complete surprise to me. I didn't expect to be pulled in by the lyricism. I did not expect to enjoy the people as much as I did, but I did. I really, really, really did, and nothing else could possibly have taken my top spot this year. So that's quite a decent little stack, I think. But I would be remiss in finishing this video without doing a couple of honourable mentions. I only have 2, and I'm going to do the least controversial one first. The first one is Broken Homes by Ben Aronovich. This is the 4th book, I think, in the PC Peter Grant series, which I finished this year, or at least I finished all of the books that were currently available this year. There is a new book coming out mid-2016, I think. I've picked this one more or less to represent the series, but also because it was my favourite out of all of them. Lots of things happen that lead into the 5th novel, which is Foxglove Summer, where we follow on the heels of the huge catastrophe of this one. And this one was the last one before everything irrevocably changed, and so it feels deeply nostalgic to me, and I love it. And I do love this series. I'm going to do a series overview on this one in 2016 as well. But my second honorary mention, and the very last book of this ridiculously long video, is definitely a controversial one, and it is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Let me start off by saying, up until halfway, literally halfway through this novel, I was captivated, I was in love. Nothing she could do could possibly be wrong. I loved the characters, I was hopeful for the characters, I was gripped by them, and then in the second section she just gut punched me. Now, I understand why people say that they are in the camp of feeling extremely emotionally manipulated by this novel, and I also understand why some people say that they absolutely loved this and it was their favourite book of the year. I am completely on the fence in between the two. There are like 3 things in the entire book that I would have changed, which would have given me a totally different ending and would have definitely put this book as my top book. It would have knocked To the Lighthouse off. It really would have. It would have. That's quite terrifying. It would have. But she didn't go there. She did something else. She chose to do something else. And I didn't enjoy it as much from that point on. So I've been thoroughly enjoying everybody's 2015 best of videos. If I have not commented on yours yet, please let me know in the comments so that I can go and watch it, because I really desperately, really want to hit everybody's this year. And if you don't have a booktube channel, but you are a viewer and a watcher and a lover of booktube, then please tell me what your top 10 was, or your top 5, or your top 15, or your top however many was in the comments, so that I can squee about them and add lots of them to my Goodreads list too. See you soon. Bye. Now I have to clean it up. This always seems like such a good idea when you're pulling them out from the shelves, but it's never so much of a good idea when you realise you have to put them back.